"You're not coming with us. Mark thinks this should be a family-only vacation." That was the text from my daughter sent while my suitcase was half-packed for Paris. I'd planned this trip paid for. It built the itinerary. And now I was cut out like I didn't exist. The real punch in the gut came hours later when I saw Facebook photos of them smiling in Paris, with Mark's parents sitting at the very restaurants I'd chosen. My blood went cold. Follow my story to the very end and you'll see exactly how I turned this betrayal into the most satisfying revenge of my life. Comment the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far my story travels. The suitcase was still open on my bed, shirts folded in neat stacks, my passport tucked into the side pocket. Paris was supposed to be my dream trip, something I'd talked about for years. I had every detail planned: the Seine River cruise, the Monet Gardens, even the little bookshop on Rue de l'Odéon where Hemingway once sat. And then came Emily's message. Cold, short, final. I read it 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood. "You're not coming with us. Mark thinks this should be a family-only vacation." Family only? I was her father. My hands shook as I set the phone down. I wanted to call her right away, demand an explanation, but I sat there staring at the suitcase instead. A trip I had paid for flights, hotels, tours, and I was being told I didn't belong. By evening, I convinced myself maybe it was some sort of mix-up. Emily could be impulsive. Maybe she'd texted before thinking it through. I tried to distract myself with a movie, but my phone buzzed again. A Facebook notification. I shouldn't have looked. I really shouldn't have. There they were, Emily and her husband Mark, at a Paris cafe I'd picked from a travel blog, sipping cappuccinos like a glossy postcard. And next to them, smiling wide, were Mark's parents. The caption read, "Family trip of a lifetime." My chest tightened. Family trip without me, using my itinerary. The next morning I called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice light. "Dad, what's up?" I skipped the small talk. "Emily, why am I seeing you in Paris with Mark's parents?" There was a pause. Then she sighed. "Mark just thought it would be less stressful without you. You can be a little overwhelming." "Overwhelming," I repeated, my voice sharpening. "You know, you ask a lot of questions, you double-check things. Mark didn't want the vacation ruined. It's just better this way. Better for them, apparently. And Dad," she added almost as an afterthought, "you can be a little needy." That word hit like a slap. Needy. As if years of paying her bills, her tuition, her wedding, her house, were some desperate attempt to cling to her. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. But inside, a switch had flipped. I walked into my home office and sat at my desk, staring at the framed photos: Emily in her graduation gown, Emily in her wedding dress, Emily and Mark in front of their house the day they moved in. My money had been behind every one of those smiles. 30 grand for her degree, another 30 for her wedding, 80 for that house. And this is how they repaid me. The bitterness burned hotter with every thought. Then, later that afternoon, my banking app pinged. A new transaction alert. I frowned. I hadn't used the card that day. I opened it and saw a charge from a Paris restaurant. I scrolled back: hotel bookings, boutique shops, museum tickets, all within the last 2 days. Emily still had authorized access to my credit card, something I'd set up years ago for emergencies. I stared at the phone, my jaw tight. She had the audacity to spend my money while excluding me from the trip I paid for. I didn't think. I just acted. Opening the account settings, I found her name under authorized users. My finger hovered for half a second before pressing remove. A confirmation popped up. This user will no longer have access to your account. Done. An hour later, the phone rang. Emily. Dad, my card just got declined at lunch. What the hell, she demanded. I removed you from my account, I said flatly. What? You can't do that. You embarrassed me in front of Mark's parents. Fix it now. No, I said, and I meant it. There was a pause. Then her voice hardened. Fine. When we get back, we're putting you in a care facility and selling your house. You'll regret this. I didn't reply. I simply ended the call, sat back in my chair, and let the silence wrap around me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to Emily's demands. I was planning something of my own. And if she thought cutting me out of Paris was the end of the story, she had no idea what was coming next. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Emily's words echoing over and over in my mind. Needy. Overwhelming. The kind of labels you can't unhear once they're spoken. But the threat, that was the part that kept me awake. Putting you in a care facility and selling your house. She'd said it so casually, like she was already halfway through the plan. By morning, I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was alert. Every part of me knew I had to act before they got home. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the drawer where I kept important documents. My fingers brushed over my will, my insurance papers. And then I pulled out a manila folder. Inside was the deed to their house, the house they lived in and called their own. But it wasn't in their names. When they'd gotten married, Emily and Mark couldn't qualify for the mortgage they wanted. Mark's credit was a mess, and Emily's income wasn't enough. So I'd bought the house outright in cash and told them they could take their time paying me back. We never transferred the deed. They'd promised to refinance within 5 years. That was 8 years ago. The property was still legally mine. I sat back and let that fact settle in. They wanted to sell my house to fund their lives. I could sell their house before they even stepped foot back in the country. I called my friend Gary, who'd been my realtor for years. How fast can you move a property if the seller is motivated? I asked. Gary chuckled. Depends on the property. Where is it? I gave him the address. There was a pause. That place? In this market, I could have a cash offer in 48 hours. I'll sign whatever you need, I said. Just keep it quiet. Not my first rodeo, Gary replied. By noon, he was at my place with the paperwork. I signed every page without hesitation. That afternoon, he scheduled private showings. By the next morning, a young couple made an offer above asking price. They were moving from out of state and wanted to close immediately. Perfect. Meanwhile, I kept checking my phone, half expecting Emily to call again. She didn't, which told me they were still in Paris, likely spending the last of what was left on their cards. I imagined them sipping champagne on the Seine, oblivious to the fact that when they landed back home, their lives would look very different. On the third day, Gary called. We're ready to close Friday morning. Buyers have cash in hand. Do it, I said. My voice was steady, but inside I felt a surge of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. Next, I called a moving company. I need an entire house packed up and moved into storage. 2 days from now. The man on the line asked for the address, and when I gave it, he said, You the owner? Yes, I answered. Everything's mine to move. They showed up right on time, 3 trucks, 6 guys, all business. I walked through each room with them pointing to what was going in storage. It felt surreal seeing Mark's golf clubs loaded into boxes, Emily's designer handbags wrapped in paper. Even the framed wedding photo they kept above the fireplace went into bubble wrap. By the end of the day, the house was empty, echoing. The movers handed me a storage receipt, Unit 24B first month paid in advance. I slid it into my pocket. That night, sitting in my living room, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stared out at the street. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like the pause before a storm. I thought about the confrontation that was coming. I didn't relish it, but I didn't fear it either. Friday morning came fast. The closing went smoothly, the money transferred directly into my account. Just like that, the house wasn't mine anymore, and it certainly wasn't theirs. 2 days later, I drove by out of curiosity. The new owners were unloading a moving truck, kids running up the front steps with boxes. I smiled, imagining Emily's face when she pulled into the driveway. I didn't have to imagine for long. A taxi rolled up, and there they were, fresh off the plane, luggage in hand, still in their travel clothes. Emily spotted me instantly. Her smile faltered. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, glancing at the unfamiliar car in the driveway. I stepped forward, calm. "This was my house. I sold it. Your belongings are in storage. Unit 24B, first month's paid." Mark's face turned red. "You can't do that. I could." "And I did," I said, meeting his glare. Emily's voice trembled. "Where are we supposed to go? That I said isn't my problem anymore." They stood frozen, processing what I'd just told them. I could see it, the realization settling in like cold rain. For years they'd believed they held the power, that I was too soft, too forgiving. They'd just learned otherwise. As I turned to leave, Emily's voice broke the silence. "You'll regret this, Dad." I didn't look back. "No," I said quietly. "I think this is the first thing I won't regret in a long time." And as I drove away, I knew the real reckoning hadn't even started yet. When I got home, I half expected the phone to start ringing immediately, but the silence stretched for hours. I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window watching the late afternoon light sink into gold. I could picture them right then dragging their suitcases into some budget motel, the shock still raw. A part of me wondered if Emily might call to apologize, but deep down, I knew better. The call finally came that evening. The number flashed on my phone. Her number. I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad," she said, voice sharp and clipped. "What the hell did you do?" "I think you know," I replied. "You sold our house." Her voice cracked on the word "our," and it almost made me laugh. "It was never yours, Emily. You know that. I paid for it. I kept the deed. I just decided to stop pretending." Mark's voice came in the background, muffled but angry. Then Emily snapped, "You had no right to throw us out like that. You had no right," I said slowly, "to spend my money on a trip I wasn't even invited to. You had no right to threaten to sell my home while I was still living in it. Rights are funny like that. They go both ways." There was a long silence. Then she hissed, "We'll see about that. Mark's calling a lawyer." I almost smiled. "Good luck with that." 2 days later, an official envelope arrived. Summons to appear in court. I wasn't surprised. I called my own lawyer, an old friend named Diane, who'd handled my affairs for years. When I told her what was going on, she actually laughed. "Robert, they don't have a case," she said. "The property was in your name. You sold it legally. They can stomp their feet all they want, but the judge will toss it in minutes." Still, I showed up for the hearing. Emily and Mark were already seated at the plaintiff's table, looking smug. Emily wore a stiff black dress, her hair pinned back like she was auditioning for a morality play. Mark kept his arms folded, projecting the kind of arrogance that only comes from knowing you've lived off someone else's dime. The judge, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, read over the file for all of 30 seconds before looking up. "I'm struggling to see why this case was brought to court," she said. Mark leaned forward. "Your Honor, that was our home." "It was not your home," the judge interrupted. "The deed clearly shows Mr. Miller as the sole owner. He had the legal right to sell it at any time." Emily's voice broke. "But we lived there for years." "Doesn't that count for something?" The judge's expression didn't soften. "Not in terms of property law." "Case dismissed. Both parties will cover their own legal fees." I caught the flicker of disbelief on Mark's face as the gavel came down. Emily didn't look at me when we stood to leave. She just grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clicking hard against the tile floor. Outside the courthouse, Diane patted my shoulder. "Told you it would be quick. Go home and enjoy your peace, Robert." Peace. That was a word I hadn't thought much about in years. Over the next week, I started hearing little bits from neighbors and mutual acquaintances. Word of what I'd done traveled fast in our small town. Some people shook their heads, whispering about how cold I'd been. But others, people who'd watched Emily and Mark take advantage of me for years, called to say it was about time someone stood up to them. One afternoon, I ran into my neighbor, Mrs. Turner, at the grocery store. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "You know, Robert, when you stopped paying for their car last year, Emily came over here complaining you were being selfish. I think she forgot how many times you saved them." I smiled faintly. She didn't forget. She just didn't think it would ever end. At night, I'd sit on my porch with a glass of whiskey, breathing in the quiet. There was no anxiety humming in the background, no expectation that my phone would light up with some urgent request for money. One evening, as the sun was setting, I thought back to that moment at the airport, Emily's stunned expression, Mark's useless threats. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like balance. They had finally learned that my generosity wasn't an endless resource, and I had finally remembered I didn't owe anyone my silence when I was being wronged, but there was still a part of me that knew they weren't done. People like Mark don't just fade quietly into the background, and Emily, she had her pride. They'd already tried legal threats. If they came for me again, I'd be ready. And sure enough, it didn't take long before the next storm began to gather. It started with a knock on my door. Not the polite kind, the heavy, impatient pounding that rattles the frame. I opened it to find Mark standing there, arms crossed, jaw tight, like he thought sheer presence could intimidate me. "Robert," he said, his voice low but edged, "we need to talk." I didn't move aside. "About what?" He glanced around as if making sure no one was watching. "You humiliated us. Emily's barely sleeping. She's devastated." I let the words hang there, waiting for the part where he admitted they were wrong. It never came. "You can't just throw your own daughter out on the street and think that's the end of it," he went on. "We're family." I almost laughed. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't take a man's money, cut him out of his own plans, and then threaten to take his home. Whatever you two are, that's not family. His jaw flexed, and I could see his temper starting to fray. "Emily's parents." He stopped himself, catching the slip. "Emily's father is supposed to take care of her. I did. For years. And it still wasn't enough, was it?" I stepped forward, closing the space between us. "Now it's my turn to take care of myself." He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You think you've won something here. You haven't. You just lit a fire you can't put out. Get off my porch. I said, my voice calm but final. He turned and walked away, but there was something in the way his shoulders squared as he reached the sidewalk, like he was already planning his next move. Over the next few days, I noticed strange little things. A black SUV parked across the street more often than not. My mailbox door left open. Once I came home to find muddy boot prints on my back porch. It could have been nothing, or it could have been Mark. Either way, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. I called an old friend, Thomas, who'd served with me years ago and now ran a private security firm. I think I've got someone sniffing around my place, I told him. He came by the next day, did a full sweep of the property, and installed a couple of discreet cameras. If they try anything, you'll know before they're halfway up the driveway, he said. 2 nights later, the cameras caught movement. The SUV pulled up again, engine idling, lights off. A figure got out, tall, broad, definitely male, and walked toward my house. He stopped at the edge of the porch, bent down and left something by the steps before getting back into the vehicle and driving off. When I opened the door, there was a manila envelope sitting on the doormat. Inside was a stack of printed screenshots, bank statements, credit reports, even my retirement account summary. My stomach tightened. They were mine. Scrawled across the top page in thick black marker were the words, "We can take more than a house." I sat down at the kitchen table, the papers spread out in front of me. This wasn't just a petty grudge anymore. This was a threat. The next morning I called Diane again and told her everything. She listened quietly before saying, "Robert, this has crossed into harassment. We can file for a restraining order, but you also need to lock down every account you have. Now." I spent the entire day with the bank changing passwords, adding security checks, removing any old authorizations. By the time I was done, every account had an extra layer of protection. I even moved a chunk of my savings into a separate institution entirely. That evening I found myself sitting in the dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. I kept replaying the last few months in my head: Paris, the threats, the court. I'd been reacting to them this whole time, playing defense. That wasn't me. Not really. I thought back to the way Mark had looked on my porch, that smug confidence that came from years of thinking I wouldn't push back. And Emily, the way she'd looked through me at the courthouse like I was just an obstacle between her and what she wanted. I realized then that I was done waiting for their next move. If they wanted a war, they'd get one. But it would be on my terms, not theirs. That night I pulled out my laptop and opened a blank document. At the top I typed a single sentence: "Everything they've ever taken from me." Then I began to write. Dates, amounts, every favor, every loan, every bill I'd covered without a thank you. By the time I stopped, the list was 3 pages long. Looking at it all laid out like that, I didn't just feel angry. I felt clear. For the first time, I knew exactly where this was headed and exactly how far I was willing to go. By morning, I had decided that list wasn't just a record, it was ammunition. I made copies, kept one in my safe, and slid another into a plain envelope. Then I called Diane. "I want this documented," I told her. "Every cent, every transaction notarized if you can." She didn't even hesitate. "Bring it in this afternoon." At her office, she scanned each page, her eyebrows rising higher the further she read. "Robert, this is years of exploitation. You've been covering everything from their car payments to their vacations, and they're the ones calling you selfish." I gave a bitter smile. "I'm done letting them rewrite the story. If they try to drag me through the mud again, I want every detail ready to hit the table." She nodded. "Consider it locked and loaded." Driving home, I felt that strange mix of calm and resolve you get right before a storm. But that calm didn't last long. When I turned onto my street, I spotted Emily standing at the end of my driveway. She wasn't dressed like she'd just happened to be in the neighborhood. She'd chosen her outfit like she was ready for a confrontation. "Dad." She started as if we were about to have a civil conversation. "We need to talk." I parked, stepped out, and closed the door behind me. "About what?" "The threat you left on my porch. Or the financial records you somehow got your hands on." She blinked, just for a second before recovering. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Emily." My voice was steady, but my hands were in fists at my sides. "You think I don't recognize when Mark's fingerprints are all over something?" Her face hardened. "You've made this impossible, you know. We were just trying to secure our future." "By destroying mine?" I asked. "It wouldn't have been like that if you just worked with us," she shot back. "But you had to humiliate us." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "Emily, you did that all by yourselves." She flinched at the words. Then her voice dropped quieter but sharper. "You're not as untouchable as you think." I stepped closer, looking her dead in the eye. "Neither are you." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she turned on her heel and walked away, her phone already in her hand, probably texting Mark. That night I found myself pacing the living room. I couldn't shake the image of her standing there, the calculated way she'd chosen her words. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I picked up the phone and called Thomas again. If I wanted to dig into someone's finances history, everything, how deep could you go? "Depends on how much you want to know," he said, "and how fast you need it." "Fast," I replied. "And everything." 2 days later, he came by with a folder so thick it barely fit in his briefcase. We sat at my kitchen table while he laid it all out. Mark's past was worse than I'd imagined. Debts stretching back years, a string of failed business ventures, and 2 civil lawsuits quietly settled out of court. Emily's credit wasn't much better. But what caught my attention was the list of accounts, joint accounts, ones I'd never known about. "See this," Thomas said, tapping the page. "They've been funneling money into this for at least 5 years. Looks like they've been using you to keep it afloat while they built a safety net for themselves." I stared at the numbers, the dates. Vacations they'd taken on a tight budget suddenly lined up perfectly with big withdrawals. Gifts I'd given for emergencies ended up padding that account. It was all there. The proof. I leaned back, the anger settling into something sharper. "Can you get me statements? Enough to show exactly how much of my money is sitting in there?" Thomas nodded. "Already working on it." That night I didn't pace. I didn't drink. I sat at my desk staring at the folder, feeling something I hadn't felt since the day I sold their house control. They thought they could back me into a corner, scare me into silence. But they'd made one mistake too many. Now I had more than just the truth on my side. I had the means to make sure they could never touch me or my life again. When Thomas returned with the full statements, he slid them across my desk like he was dealing a winning hand in a high-stakes game. I flipped through the pages, each one a new nail in the coffin of their "we're struggling" act. Tens of thousands sat in that account, my money rebranded as their savings. "They've been careful," Thomas said, leaning back in his chair. "Small withdrawals, steady deposits, never enough to trip any alarms, but once you match the dates to your own records," I was already doing it in my head. "The emergency when their roof was leaking. There it was, a deposit 2 days later for the exact same amount I'd given them. The time Emily claimed their car had died on the highway. Another deposit. Same pattern." "They thought they were clever," I muttered. "They thought you weren't looking," Thomas corrected. I sat there for a long moment, the quiet in the room broken only by the hum of the old desk lamp. Then I said, "I want this formalized. A complete timeline, every deposit, every withdrawal tied directly to me. Thomas gave a slow nod. "You're not just defending yourself anymore, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm making sure the next move ends this for good." That evening I called Diane. She didn't even let me finish explaining before she said, "Robert, with this level of detail, you could press charges for fraud. At the very least, you'd have leverage in any negotiation." "I'm not looking to negotiate," I told her. She was quiet for a moment. "Then I suggest you decide exactly what you want the outcome to be. Once you pull this trigger, there's no taking it back." The weight of that sat with me long after I hung up. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stepped out onto the porch. The night was still the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts too clearly, and mine were running circles. Part of me still remembered Emily as a little girl running barefoot in the yard, hair tangled, laughing at nothing. I had given her everything I could, not just money, but time, stability, a life without worry. And now, here we were, circling each other like enemies. But then I thought about that envelope on my porch, the words scrawled in black marker. I thought about the way she'd looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't untouchable. That wasn't my daughter speaking from a place of desperation. That was someone who believed she could take what she wanted without consequence. The next morning I walked into Diane's office with the folder in hand. She read through it carefully, her expression shifting from focused to almost grim. "Robert, this is airtight," she said finally. "If we file this, it'll destroy their financial credibility. No bank, no investor, no partner will touch them." "That's the idea," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. "I'll draft the necessary filings. But you need to prepare yourself. This won't just burn bridges. This will salt the earth." "I know." Later that week I was in the hardware store picking up a few things when I saw Emily at the other end of the aisle. She spotted me almost instantly. For a second she hesitated, then started walking toward me. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said quietly, keeping her voice low so no one else would hear. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago," I replied. Her eyes narrowed. "You think this makes you strong? All it makes you is bitter." "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "It makes me free." For a moment she didn't say anything, then she leaned in just enough for only me to hear. "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I just turned, paid for my things, and walked out. That night Diane called to say the filings were in motion. It was like setting a row of dominoes in place and giving the first one a push. All I had to do now was watch them fall. I knew there would be fallout whispers around town, maybe even another confrontation. But as I sat on my porch in the cool night air, I realized I wasn't dreading it anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to their chaos. I was directing the course. And soon, whether they were ready for it or not, they'd learn exactly what that meant. 3 days later, the first shockwaves hit. It started with a voicemail from Thomas. "Robert, you might want to check the local business bulletin. Mark's name is on it, and not in a good way." I pulled it up on my phone. There it was, front page of the finance section, local contractor, under investigation for fraudulent financial practices. The article didn't name me, but it outlined everything Thomas and Diane had documented. Unexplained deposits, suspicious withdrawals, offshore transfers. The kind of details only come from hard evidence. By mid-afternoon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. A few old friends called to check if I was okay. 1 or 2 neighbors stopped by under the guise of borrowing tools, but clearly fishing for the story. I gave them nothing. Then came the knock at the door. Emily. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. She stepped inside, her voice sharp and fast. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Mark's business is tanking. Clients are pulling out. He could lose everything." I shut the door slowly, leaning against it. "Everything he built on my back. Yeah, I have an idea. This is going to ruin us," she snapped. "You ruined yourselves," I said. "I just stopped letting you drag me down with you." Her voice cracked then, just a fraction. "We were your family. You were my responsibility," I corrected. "There's a difference, and I've carried that weight long enough." For a moment she looked like she might cry, but the tears never came. Instead, her eyes went cold. "You think people won't see you for what you are?" A bitter old man lashing out. I stepped forward, closing the space between us. "Let them see. I'm not hiding anymore." She left without slamming the door, which somehow felt colder than if she had. That night I sat at the kitchen table with Diane on speakerphone. She'd just come from a meeting with the investigator assigned to Mark's case. "They've frozen 2 of his accounts," she said. "If he tries to move money, they'll know." "What about Emily?" I asked. "She's listed as a secondary account holder on at least one of them. She's not going to be untouched by this." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of that. I'd told myself I was ready for whatever came, but hearing her name in that context made it real. The following morning I was at the coffee shop when a man I vaguely recognized approached my table. "You Robert Miller?" he asked. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Greg. Used to work for Mark. Just wanted to say, I'm glad someone finally stood up to him. The guy's been screwing people over for years. You're doing the town a favor." He left before I could respond, but his words stuck with me. Maybe I wasn't the villain in this story after all, at least not to everyone. That afternoon, Thomas stopped by with an update. "Word is Mark's scrambling to cover his tracks. He's been calling in favors trying to get people to vouch for him, but the problem is his reputation's catching up faster than his excuses." I poured us both a coffee, the steam curling in the quiet. "Let him run. The more he scrambles, the more mistakes he'll make." Thomas smirked. "That's the Robert I remember." But that night as I sat alone, the memory of Emily's voice kept echoing. The part of me that still saw her as my daughter, not my adversary, was quieter now. But it wasn't gone. I thought about the years I'd spent bending over backward for her happiness, even when it cost me my own. And now here we were on opposite sides of a fight neither of us could walk away from. It was strange the way clarity can feel both freeing and heavy at the same time. I had no doubts about my course, but I knew the next move would cut deeper than anything before. And once I made it, there'd be no room left for second thoughts. 2 days later, the rain came hard, the kind that makes the streets shine black and forces you to keep your collar turned up. I was on my way back from the store when I saw Mark's SUV parked crooked in front of my house. My grip tightened on the paper bags as I walked up the driveway. He was leaning against the hood, arms folded, eyes following me like a hawk's. "You happy now?" he asked before I'd even reached the porch. His voice was low, but the edge was sharp enough to cut glass. I didn't stop moving. "I'm not in the business of making you happy." "You've destroyed my reputation," he said. "Jobs are gone. Partners won't answer my calls. And you know what? None of that was your business." I set the groceries on the porch rail and looked him dead in the eye. "You made it my business the moment you decided to use my money to prop up your empire." His jaw flexed. "You think you're the first person to come after me? I've survived worse." "Not from me," I said. That seemed to land harder than I expected. He stepped closer, the rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "You've dragged Emily into this. She's drowning in legal mess now because of you. She's there because she chose to be tied to your accounts," I shot back. She knew exactly what she was signing. Mark's nostrils flared, and for a moment I thought he might swing at me. But then he smiled, a slow, deliberate thing. "You've got a lot of fight for a man standing on a shrinking island. Remember that when you're alone in the dark." He walked away, his boots splashing through the puddles, and the SUV roared off before I could answer. Inside, I set the bags down and just stood there, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. It wasn't fear that crept in, it was calculation. Mark was bluffing. But the thing about bluffers is they push until someone calls them out. That night Diane called. "Robert, I just got off the phone with the investigator. They've subpoenaed bank records beyond what we provided. It's going deeper than we expected." "Good," I said. "There's more. A few of Mark's past clients have come forward with complaints. If those turn into formal charges, this won't just be a financial hit. He could be looking at criminal exposure." I let that sink in. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, not exactly. It was the sense of a door finally closing, one I'd been holding shut with my bare hands for too long. But Emily, I knew she'd see it as a full-on betrayal no matter how it played out. The next day my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Dad." Emily's voice came through thin and strained. "Can we meet? Just us?" There was something in her tone that made me pause. Where she suggested a diner halfway between our places. When I got there, she was already in a booth, a cup of coffee cooling in front of her. "I didn't come here to fight." She started, eyes fixed on the table. I need to understand why you had to do it this way." I slid into the seat across from her. "Because every other way I tried, you ignored. You and Mark both." She looked up then, and for the first time in months I saw something other than defiance in her eyes. "We were scared. We made bad decisions. But you went nuclear. You were holding matches over my life savings?" I said softly. "You don't get to be shocked when the fire burns you, too." Her lip trembled, but she caught herself. "So this is it. We just burn everything down." I didn't answer right away. I sipped my coffee, let the quiet fill the space between us. Finally I said, "Sometimes the only way to rebuild is to clear the ground first." She leaned back, staring at me like she was trying to memorize my face. "I don't know if I can forgive you." "I'm not asking you to," I said. When I left the diner, the rain had stopped, but the streets still gleamed under the streetlights. I drove home with the window cracked, the cool air cutting through the heaviness in my chest. Mark was still out there, and I knew he wouldn't let this die quietly. But for the first time in a long time, Emily's walls had cracked just enough to see the person I used to know. And that small fracture was enough to make me realize the fight wasn't over yet, not in the way I'd first imagined. The following morning I woke to the sound of tires crunching on the gravel outside. My first thought was Mark, but when I looked through the blinds, it was Thomas's truck. He climbed out, a manila envelope in his hand, his face wearing that tight expression that meant the news inside wasn't simple. He stepped into the kitchen without needing an invitation. "Robert, things are moving faster than I thought." The investigator found a secondary ledger, one Mark clearly didn't intend anyone to see. Offshore accounts, shell companies, and Emily's name is on 2 of them. The words landed heavy. I pulled out a chair, sat slowly. "You're telling me she's deeper in this than I thought." Thomas set the envelope down and slid it toward me. "This isn't just her being tied to his mess. This is her signing off on transactions. Big ones. If they push it, she's not just collateral damage. She's complicit. I opened the envelope. The copies of her signature were like punches to the gut. Not the shaky scrawl of someone pressured. No, these were confident, deliberate strokes. "She knew," I said under my breath. Thomas's voice was careful. "I think you need to decide if protecting her is still part of your plan." I didn't answer. By afternoon, Diane called. "Robert, the DA's office is sniffing around. They haven't filed charges yet, but if Emily's involved at this level, it's only a matter of time before they call her in." My mind was a storm. For months, I'd told myself I was exposing Mark and rescuing Emily from his grip. Now I had to face the fact that she wasn't just standing beside him. She'd stepped fully into his shadow. That night, as I sat in the dim light of the living room, there was a knock at the door. Not hurried, not tentative, steady. When I opened it, there she was. No umbrella, rain dampening her hair, eyes locked on mine. "You're going to let them destroy me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside, but she didn't move. "You destroyed yourself when you signed those papers." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand. I did it because Mark said I cut her off. Don't you dare tell me you didn't have a choice. You've always had a choice." For a moment, her defiance cracked, replaced by something like desperation. "Dad, please. If you push this, I'll lose everything." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years between us. "Then maybe it's time you find out what everything really is." She blinked hard, like she was holding back more than just tears, then turned and walked away into the rain. When the door closed, I leaned against it, the sound of her footsteps fading into the night. There was no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just the cold certainty that the path I'd chosen had passed the point of no return. The next day, Thomas called again. "Robert, you should know Mark's panicking. He's trying to liquidate assets before they're frozen. It's sloppy. If the feds catch it, it's over. Let them catch it," I said. And yet deep down I knew what was coming. Mark wasn't the type to go quietly, and Emily, she'd just made it clear she wasn't stepping away from him no matter how deep he dragged her. The fight was no longer about protecting her. It was about ending the game before they found a way to turn the pieces back on me. 2 mornings later, I got a call from Diane before the sun was even up. Her voice was clipped urgent. "Robert, we have a development." The investigator intercepted a wire transfer Mark initiated at midnight. $250,000 routed through one of the shell companies with Emily's authorization code. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone pressed tight to my ear. "So they caught him in real time." "They caught both of them," she said, letting the words hang. "The DA is leaning toward pressing charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. If that happens, they'll be facing it together." I ran a hand over my face, the weight of it all pressing down like a stone slab. What's the next step? They'll likely be called in for questioning within days. If Emily has any hope of separating herself from Mark's mess, she needs her own counsel now. I almost laughed at the irony. You think she'd listen to me if I told her that Diane didn't answer and she didn't need to? We both knew the truth. By mid-morning, the news had hit the local radio. I was in the hardware store when I heard the announcer reading the headline, and heads turned toward me. Some looks were sympathetic, others curious, a few tinged with judgment. I kept my eyes forward, paid for my things, and walked out without a word. When I got home, Thomas was already waiting on my porch. "We've got to be careful now," he said. "Mark's desperate. That makes him unpredictable. And when people like him start feeling the walls close in, they swing wild." I unlocked the door, motioning him inside. "Let him swing. The more he does, the deeper he digs his own grave." Thomas gave me a look. Just remember, if he drags Emily down with him, the rest of this town won't remember your reasons. They'll just remember you let it happen. That night the rain returned, tapping the windows in an uneven rhythm. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I saw headlights slow in front of the house. The engine idled for a moment, then the vehicle rolled on. I couldn't tell if it was paranoia or instinct, but something about it made me double-check the locks. The next morning my phone buzzed again. This time it was Emily. Her voice was quiet, almost hollow. "They served us papers today. Subpoena. They want everything: bank records, contracts, even personal emails." I said nothing at first. "I don't know what to do," she admitted after a pause. "Mark's saying it's all under control, but I can tell he's scared." "You hire your own lawyer," I said evenly, "and you tell them the truth." Her breath caught like the suggestion itself was a betrayal. "If I do that, it'll destroy him. If you don't, he'll destroy you," I replied. There was silence on the line, just the faint sound of her breathing. Then she said, "I can't talk about this anymore," and hung up. I stood there for a long while, the phone still in my hand. That evening, Diane called again. "Robert, you should be ready for the possibility they'll try to pin some of this back on you. Mark's pattern is to deflect blame, and with Emily involved, you're an easy target for the sympathy angle." I felt the heat rise in my chest. "Let him try. I've got the paper trail and I've got you." "Then be ready," she said, "because when the dam breaks, it's going to happen fast." After we hung up, I sat in the living room, lights low, and listened to the wind push against the house. The fight was no longer about proving a point, it was about survival, and somewhere deep down I knew that before this ended, someone was going to lose far more than money. 2 days later, the dam began to crack. I was eating breakfast when the knock came firm, measured, official. Through the window I saw 2 men in dark suits, their car idling at the curb. My stomach sank even before I opened the door. Mr. Miller, the taller one, asked, flashing a badge, "We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding your financial dealings with Mark Reynolds." I stepped aside, letting them in. Their eyes swept the room like they were already cataloging evidence. "I haven't had financial dealings with Mark in over a year," I said as they sat at the table. "That's not entirely accurate," the shorter one replied, pulling a file from his briefcase. "We have documentation showing funds transferred from your account to one of Mr. Reynolds' companies 6 months ago." I frowned. "Not by me." They slid a printed bank statement across the table. My name was there clear as day. The signature wasn't mine, but it was close enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. Emily. The realization hit like ice water down my spine. She had access to that account once, back when she was helping me pay bills during my surgery. I'd never closed it after. "Forgery," I said quietly. "And I can prove it." The agents exchanged a glance. "We'll need that proof. Soon. The DA is moving quickly." After they left, I sat there for a long time, the untouched coffee cooling in front of me. This wasn't just Mark throwing punches. Now he'd dragged Emily into the role of weapon, and whether she meant it or not, she just made herself the perfect shield for him. By midday, I called Diane. They came to the house. "They've got forged transfers in my name." Her voice sharpened instantly. "Then we go on offense. We subpoena the handwriting analysis, match it against her known signatures, and expose it before they can spin it." "And what if that destroys her?" I asked. There was a pause. "Robert, she's already standing beside the man trying to bury you. You have to decide if you're willing to be buried with her." Later that afternoon, Thomas stopped by. "I heard the feds were here." "What's going on?" I told him. His jaw tightened. "He's using her as cover. Classic move." Makes you look like the bitter old man going after his daughter instead of the crook who set this all up." "That's exactly what he wants," I said. "Then you flip it. Show the truth. Show everyone she was a pawn in his game, whether she admits it or not." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with every scrap of evidence spread before me. Bank records, emails, notes from Diane, and there at the center, the forged transfer. I traced my finger over the false signature, my chest heavy. This was my daughter's handwriting, my daughter's choice. And if I moved forward, there'd be no coming back from what I was about to do. The next morning, I made my decision. The sky was overcast, a dull gray pressing low over the rooftops, the kind of day that makes every shadow feel heavier. I gathered the documents into a neat stack, slipped them into a folder, and drove to Diane's office without calling ahead. When I walked in, she looked up from her desk, eyes scanning my face before they dropped to the folder in my hand. "You're ready," she said. It wasn't a question. I set the folder down in front of her. Everything they need. Bank records, copies of her signature from past documents. The handwriting analysis request is already filed. Once this goes to the DA, there's no turning back. Diane nodded slowly, then leaned back in her chair. "You know this could put her in front of a grand jury." "I know," I said quietly. "And I hate myself for it." We went through every page, her pen scratching notes in the margins. By the time we finished, the clock on her wall read nearly noon. She closed the folder, her voice calm but deliberate. "Once I deliver this, it's out of our hands. The DA will decide how to proceed." I stood, my hands heavier than they should have been. "Do it." The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried working in the garage, fixing the loose hinge on the old tool chest, but my mind kept drifting. I replayed the moments with Emily when she was little, the afternoons in the backyard, the way she used to run to me when she scraped her knee. Now I was the one delivering the wound. Around 6, my phone rang. It was Thomas. "Robert, brace yourself. Mark's been arrested. They picked him up an hour ago, tried to get into his office to shred files. It's all over the news." I gripped the phone tighter. "And Emily. She's not in custody. Yet. But she's named in the warrant as a cooperating party. They'll come for her if she doesn't lawyer up fast." Not 30 minutes later, there was another knock on my door. This time it was Emily. No pretense, no hard shell, just my daughter, her eyes rimmed red, her shoulders hunched. They came to the house. She said, her voice breaking. They said, "I need to come in for questioning." I don't know what to do. I let her in, closing the door behind us. "You tell them the truth, Emily. Every piece of it. You signed things you didn't understand. You trusted a man who used you, and now you have to decide if you're willing to keep paying for his mistakes." She sank into the couch, her hands covering her face. I thought I was helping him. I thought if I just kept things moving, we'd be okay. I sat beside her. "You can still help yourself, but you have to choose now. Him or you." For the first time in months, she looked at me like my words mattered. "If I tell them everything, will you hate me for what I did?" "No," I said, my throat tightening. "I'll hate it if you keep lying to protect him." She nodded slowly, like the weight of her choice was just settling in. "Okay," she whispered. That night after she left, I sat alone in the quiet house. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the yard. Mark's empire was crumbling, and Emily stood at the edge of the wreckage, deciding whether to climb out or go down with him. And I knew one way or another, this fight was about to end, not clean, not without scars, but with the truth finally dragged into the light.